Alright, let's start with this chapter called File System Structure and Implementation. Now this is a star topic, so pay full attention, make some important notes out of my video, out of my lecture, and try to build up. You can expect some 5 marks or maybe even 10 mark questions on this. Is it alright? Okay. Now imagine this is my disk, hard disk. Generally, as you know very well, most of you who have systems at your home, desktops or laptops, generally you carry out this. So this is my disk. Generally, we divide our disk into logical units which are called partitions. Partitions are also called volumes, and these partitions or volumes are generally designated by drive letters like C:, D:, E:, you know it, is it not? So we divide our disk into partitions by using some facility like fdisk or disk fragmenter or something like that. So every partition is designated by a drive letter like C:, D:, E:, F:, like that. Likewise, if you connect the pen drive to the disk, then also it will be designated by a drive letter like I:, H:, and so on. These are partitions. Now partitions are of two types. What are they? Primary partition, extended partitions. Primary partitions are bootable partitions. You can store operating system onto it, plus you can store other data. Whereas extended or logical partitions are non-bootable, means you cannot store operating system onto it. You can store only data like files, application software and so on. So this is first point. So disk is divided into partitions. Partitions are of two types, primary and extended. Primary also called bootable, and they have the capability to store operating systems, whereas extended partitions or logical drives are non-bootable. They cannot store any operating system onto it. Now second important point, please understand, every partition like C, D, E, which is maybe primary or extended, must be formatted with some file system before storing data onto it. Maybe I can format it with file systems like NTFS or FAT32. Okay, these are the things which we generally use it, NTFS or FAT32, or Unix file system. This is called UFS, Unix file system. So it has to be formatted with some file system. Now I'm going to show you what exactly is going to happen when we format a disk with any file system. Say for example, this is my partition. This is our partition. Okay. So the first data structure that gets created when I format the disk with any partition is this. The first block that gets created is called BCB. You have to remember this. I will write full form of it. Boot control block. Boot control block. In case, as I said earlier, primary partitions are bootable. So if I have a bootable partition, then I will store the first operating system program here. Boot means booting the operating system. So the first operating system program will be stored here like kernel.exe, init program, all will be stored here in case if the partition is primary partition and having operating system onto it. Now if it is an extended partition and it is non-bootable, then this boot control block will simply be empty. So what I am saying, boot control block is only meant for storing operating system initial program. It cannot be used for any other thing that you can store it here. Okay, it is meant only for storing booting program. Second is called PCB, partition control block. What is it called? Partition control block, PCB. Now this partition control block is also a very important block that gives the complete picture of the partition, complete status of the partition. I mean, what is the size of the partition, how many blocks are there, whether blocks are free or not, how many are good blocks, how many are bad blocks, what is block size. Complete information about the partition is kept here. That is why it is called partition control block. Now partition control block is known by different terms in different file system. In some file system it is called super block, and in some file system it is called master file table. Master file table. Generally different names are given to this. Super block or master file table, partition control block. And then the third part is called directory structure. Here I am writing directory structure. That one in my previous video I have talked about directory structure, single level, two level, multi-level, hierarchical, directed acyclic graph directory structure. So the directory structure will be kept here. So this is called partition structure. This could be a simple 3-mark question or 5-mark. Describe partition structure. What are the components of partition structure? You will have to show this. What are the 3 important components? Once again I will summarize. Boot control block that contain the main booting program of operating system here. Partition control block, this is the administrative block of the partition which contains or gives information about the partition. Okay, like what is the size of partition, how many blocks are there, how many blocks are good blocks, how many blocks are bad blocks. The complete information of the partition is kept in PCB. And the third component is called directory structure, that gives information about the directory. I have explained to you what is other. Now the last part is called data blocks. So the data of the files are kept here. Every partition of the disk will have this. So what is this portion? Data blocks. So file is, if you remember in my earlier discussion, one of the important file attributes I said blocks in use. So these blocks are the thing. So these blocks are allocated to the file for storing the data. This is the general structure. So it has 2 parts. This is I call admin part of the disk, and this is the user part. Admin part is 3 things: PCB, BCB and directory structure. Then user data blocks, the application software, the user file, the operating system files, everything will be stored in these blocks. So the data on file is stored, the data on disk is stored in the form of blocks. These are the blocks. So this is the typical directory structure. Partition structure. So the disk is are divided into partition. The partitions are basically of 2 types, primary and extended. Okay. So primary, what is the primary partition, what is extended partition, I have explained to you, and then I have shown you the partition structure. Now before I start my discussion on implementation issues of the file system, what are the important functions or implementation issues of the file system, I would present to you a basic design outline of the file system layers. So the file system is a software. So generally, what are the different layers? File system layers. File system is a software. What are its layers? How is file system organized? What are the different layers present? First, at the top level, we will have applications. Application programs. Every program may, every user or user program may try to access the file. So here I will show application program. Okay, take the down. Okay, and then the next layer is logical file system. Logical file system. Logical file system. I will talk about each of these. I am using different colors for different layers. Third layer is file organization module. File, I'm writing in short, organization module. Next, basic file system. Basic file system. And lastly, we have input output control, and beneath it we will have devices. So let's understand the functionality of this. Okay, what each layer does. So let's see. Now here the devices mean this is the hardware. That means this includes your disk, its controllers. In the subject of CO you might have studied about disk controllers, DMA controllers and so on. So that is devices. Now what do input output control module will contain? This will contain device drivers. Every device need to have a device driver. We generally install the device driver, remember? So all device drivers and the interrupt handlers are here. Interrupt handlers are there in input output control module. Now basic file system issues commands to appropriate device driver for reading blocks of the disk. Earlier I said the last part of the disk contain blocks, so issues commands to device driver for reading of blocks. Basic file system. That means all the device drivers are under the control of basic file system. File organization module basically translates logical block numbers. We'll talk about this logical blocks later. Logical blocks to physical blocks. Means address translation. Like in memory management, we have seen address translation. So essentially, free file organization module does that. And then it also includes free space manager. We'll talk about this also as a function later on. Free space management. This is an exclusive topic that we have to discuss. What portions of disk are free, what portions are in use, all these are described, all these are under the control of file organization module. Logical file system knows about the concept of files, directories, okay, and the concept of inodes, directory structure. So the whole logical structure of the file system is here. Means application program will give the name of the file system will search for the file, get the metadata information from the directory entry, and then also get the logical block numbers in use and give it to file organization module. File organization module will convert logical blocks to physical blocks. Physical blocks are given as input to basic file system. Basic file system will select the appropriate device driver and issue the commands for reading and writing those blocks. So that will go to the device driver. Device driver will prepare the disk mechanism to carry out the read and write operation, and then the data will get flushed from disk into main memory through DMA operation. That is what is the layered file system. This could be a simple 5-mark question in your exam. Describe the various layers of the file system. How is file system structured? How is file system layered, and what are the important functions of each of them, like this. So in the PPT which I am going to share, you will find in detail all these modules. Functionality also is described in the PPT. You can have a look at it. So this is the files organization module. Okay. So here in this lecture we have seen what is the structure of disk. Disk is divided into partitions. Partitions are of 2 types. What are the 2 types? Primary and extended. Remember that? Okay, here. Primary and extended. Primary partitions are bootable, extended partitions are non-bootable. Then every partition has to be formatted with some file system. When I format it, I will get BCB, I will get PCB, I will have directory structure, and then the data blocks. Okay, so whether it is primary partition or extended partition, it has to be formatted. Now, if you organize the file system software, if you implement the file system software, it is generally implemented in the form of layers. So what are those layers? Application programs, logical file system, file organization module, basic file system, input output control, and the devices. The functionality of each of them briefly I have outlined. Details you can see from the PPT and make a note of it. So this is one part. Now in the next lecture, we will look into the very important aspect called implementation issues of the file system. So that is 10-mark questions you can expect compulsory from this unit on implementation aspects of file system. That we will see in the next lecture. Okay.